Hello fellow collectors, I hope you're doing wonderfully well. Today we're going to take a look at my May in film. Unfortunately I am a little bit late with this video yet again, but hopefully one of these months I will finally get back on track. May for me was definitely on the quieter side of viewing, as to be honest things just got crazy busy at work and they've not really calmed down since then. But because of that I had much less free time to sort of get into some great films. And as it turned out, it was just much more of an average month of watching for me. I didn't really watch much that really stood out, with the slight exception of a short film journey, which of course I'll talk about a little bit later. In May also I got much more into my reading and so decided to spend what little of my free time there was getting cracking with some great books. And because last time I mentioned reading, which to be fair was quite a long time ago, someone left me the comment to say, well, what did you read? I'll include a quick picture just so you can see what I was making my way through in May. But that is more than enough of a preamble, so let's get right into things and talk about the best films I watched in May. So, the film journey that I took this month was to watch Eric Rohmer's Tales of the Four Seasons. Despite my great love for French cinema and for the French New Wave, I'd never actually had the pleasure of watching any of Rohmer's films before, though of course he's been on my radar for years, so I thought it was high time that I righted that wrong. In my efforts this year to be more careful in how I collect and also much more wise with my money, I thought instead of going straight for the new-ish Criterion Blu-rays, I'd instead go for the older Cares on DVD releases, which I managed to snag for just over a tenner, which was pretty good. But obviously it's safe to say that I'll certainly be looking to pick up the Blu-rays in the future, as this was just a wonderful journey. I'm a big fan of more thematic trilogies or thematic series of films where there is little if any sort of connecting characters or story points, more like Krzysztof Kieslowski's astonishing Three Colours trilogy or much more recently Tyler Sheridan's Frontier trilogies for example. Well, here we have 4 films set over the 4 different seasons, and though there are very much some commonalities tonally, these are all standalone films, and so you can watch them in any order. And not by design, but purely by chance, I actually ended up watching them in release order. I have heard that Rohmer is sort of the originator for the walk and talk style of film, and these all very much reflect that. They are what I might describe as hangout films because you've just got the characters hanging out and chatting away about their lives, but they're each surprisingly compelling. And so first up we start with A Tale of Springtime, from 1990 and starring Anne Teixeira, Florence Darrell, Hughes Quester and Eloise Bennett. When I was watching this one, I did think to myself, if I tried to explain this film to someone, it might seem like a fairly dull story, but let me assure you it is actually deceptively engaging. Our story follows 2 women, one younger and studying music at university, and one a little bit older in her later 20s who is working as a philosophy teacher. They meet at a party where they've both ended up alone and then strike up a friendship and start briefly living together in the university student's father's flat. What follows is an interesting tangle of lives as the women get to know each other, and the teacher in particular becomes more acquainted with and more involved in the student's family life, which includes her father and father's young girlfriend. It's almost a journey into the banality of life with a friend, as they go to a holiday home in the country, but it's not to sightsee or do anything exciting per se, it's just to study and to read or work in the garden as they talk and share and think. This is a film all about the compelling nature of friendship and our other relationships. There is also quite an interesting element to this one, in that the younger woman, the student, has a boyfriend who is closer to her father's age, and her father has a girlfriend who is close to his daughter's age. And this definitely creates tension in some ways, but perhaps not in the ways you might think. I think it actually raises quite an interesting point about whether that's right for one person. Does it mean it's wrong for another? Or is such a large age gap ever right? Or are priorities just too different when 2 people are at different stages of life? Well, this certainly isn't the type of film to give you answers, but it is most definitely one that raises some interesting questions. This is a film where there's arguing, there's laughter, there's peace, and then there's drama, and a little bit of romantic tension thrown into this one as well. It's all what you might think to expect from a story where the characters are front and centre. What was particularly interesting to me though is that these are not the most likeable characters at all. Rohmer, who also wrote the screenplay for each of these films, has really created people that feel fully realised. Reasonable in one moment and unreasonable the next, letting loose their emotions and then calming down, acting foolishly perhaps when facing their challenging family dynamics. He's undoubtedly a master of writing characters, and here in this first film I was already quite struck by that. And then moving on, from 1992 we have A Tale of Winter, which stars Charlotte Very, Michael Voletti, Hervé Furic, Frederick van der Drischer and Eva Larashi. Perhaps this one was the most affecting film for me out of the four, as it has some really powerful and moving moments. Our story follows, frankly, a pretty selfish woman who fell in love over a summer some years previous. However, through an unfortunate miscommunication, they lost touch and weren't able to be reunited. People talk about having a love of their life, and this film really asks the question, does that really exist? Clearly this was a profound relationship for her, and it's coloured what she thinks about love and how deep and rich that should feel. And so she's a character that tries to search for it in her everyday life that she has to live. The man that she fell in love with that summer has almost become a myth in her mind, but she is, and fairly so, trying to capture that or recapture that with someone else. However, in doing so, good people get caught in her wake, and heartbreaks, relationship foolishness, will they, won't they abound in this film. This is again a compelling watch. Charlotte Very plays our main character Felice, and does so absolutely brilliantly. She, again from Rohmer, is not a particularly likeable character. In fact, I found some of what she did needlessly cruel, but what her character is very understandable. Maybe that's Rohmer's secret. He creates characters that you can understand. Perhaps you can't necessarily sympathise, but you can empathise. Right at the start of this film, we see that summer love. It's sort of a montage, and so we know exactly what it is that has altered the course of her life. And whether she goes about the rest of it in the right way or not, you can't help but think to yourself, I get it. Also, the ending of this one is simply superb, and we have an almost operatic level of emotion in play. Very powerful stuff indeed. Moving on, and from 1996 we have A Summer's Tale, starring Amanda Longley, who you might recognise from another Rohmer film, Pauline at the Beach, alongside Melvin Popard, Gwenelle Simon and Aurelia Nolan. This is, I believe, most people's favourite of Rohmer's seasonal tales, and it's actually his most popular film on Letterboxd. And I can certainly see why, because this one is full of romantic tension, and there are some more, I would say perhaps, overtly likeable aspects, particularly about one of the characters. So our story here follows a young man who has come on holiday to a beach town, supposedly to meet up with his long-distance girlfriend who isn't there when he arrives. Will she come or won't she? Shortly after arriving, he ends up meeting another young woman, Margot, a student at a cafe, and they strike up a friendship. And then shortly later he meets another young woman when they are out dancing, Celine, and what follows is the foolishness and frivolity of a youthful summer. Should he become romantically entangled with the student, who herself is perhaps somewhat entangled elsewhere? Or with the dancing friend, who is also somewhat dating another two chaps? Or should he stick with his long-distance girlfriend who has gone gallivanting in Spain and up to goodness knows what, and he himself seems to flip between hot and cold about her? I think the warm summer beach setting, the romances, the who should end up together, all combine to make this a great crowd pleaser. The standout for me, and probably for most people, is of course Amanda Longley, who is particularly wonderful here. Melvin Papard's character, Gaspar, is the quintessential young artistic type of man that doesn't recognise the incredible luck he has and potential all around him. Being so wrapped up in his own thoughts and direction, his music and his future, he is very much a reactionary character, I think, and his emotions seem to ebb and flow like the waves on the beach. There are moments where you think, Gaspar, what are you doing? Obviously, she's the one, go for it. And then other moments where I was almost shouting, walk away, Gaspar, you don't need this drama. It's a film that you can't help but get swept away in, even if some of the drama is just, of course, youthful silliness, but it is wonderfully engaging. Again, I'm just struck by what an amazingly good job Rohmer does of giving us real people to watch. One moment you like them, the next moment you don't. The young people here are all blowing to and fro like the wind, making one decision and then making the opposite one the next moment. It's a really great watch, this one, and of course the beach and summer setting give it that great holiday atmosphere. And then last but by no means least, from 1998 we have A Tale of Autumn, starring Marie Riviere, who you might also recognise from some of Rohmer's other films, as well as Beatrice Romand and Alain Libault, Alexia Porto and Didier Sandra. On this fourth film, I was thinking throughout it, Eric, Mr. Rohmer, who hurt you? You cannot help but get the sense that Rohmer himself was perhaps unlucky in some of his romantic adventures and was hurt by more than one woman in his life. And in particular, in this one, the final of these four films, I think a recurring theme that comes up time and again is one about men seeming to care much more about the relationship than the woman in the relationship. So our story here follows a happily married middle-aged woman who has a friend that is single, and on behalf of her friend, and without her knowing, she places an ad in the local paper to try to find her a man and find her love. What follows is, again, a tangle of feelings, relationships, at times guarded and at times open conversation, and plenty of will they, won't they, for several couples in this one. I felt that this final film for me was a nice change of pace with the main characters, as springtime, winter and summer, though they all have some slightly older characters in them, very much focus more on young people roughly in their 20s. But this one more changes the focus to characters around their mid-40s. But as is so often the way in life, though we age and mature, when it comes to love we can still make those same silly mistakes and act a bit out of character, no matter what age you are. However, in this film we do also still have a young person and a couple of romantic relationships that very nicely contrasts relationships and priorities at different stages of life. I'd say this one, along with Winter, were the two films that got me up in arms the most, so to speak. There are some really frustrating character moments in this one where love and people's emotions are treated like a game, and it's enormously frustrating to watch unfold. However, at other points it had me laughing with joy and giddiness. There are moments that are frankly too sweet not to get wrapped up in, appreciating the loveliness of them. And also a fantastic ending to this one, with perhaps a hint of ambiguity, which I always enjoy. There is a really great line in this one, which I think sums things up in this film nicely, and perhaps to be honest sums up the whole series of films really. And it's the middle-aged professor that says, "You can't force people to fall in love. 2 + 2 does not always equal 4 in matters of the heart." Which, of course, is spot on, and it actually reminded me a little bit of Celine Song's excellent film The Materialists, which explores that excellently, I thought. But what a riveting watch this one was. Maybe, possibly, if I had to choose, my favourite of the four, but that's a very tough call to make. Well, overall, the journey through these films was a wonderful one. As I said earlier, they are all standalone films that you can watch without needing to see the others, all with different characters and settings, etc. And you can watch them in any order, though I did read some people do like to finish with A Tale of Autumn. Something that links all these films together seems to be that his films never go where I think they will, Just as I seem to have settled into the story, feel like I've got to know the characters and sort of relaxed into what to expect next, he always throws a spanner in the works, which I think is just so brilliant. They have a particular moment that turns everything on its head, makes you reassess and firmly grabs your attention in an iron grip. It's a great testament, I think, to his writing and the constructing of his stories. Well, to misquote from Jerry Maguire, Eric Rohmer, you had me at a tale of springtime. From the first of his films that I watched, I knew I had come across a director that I would grow to love, and I've not watched a single film of his since that has made me think any differently. Watching these films has set me on the start of another incredible cinematic journey into the rest of Rohmer's filmography, and you can certainly expect to hear me talk about many more of his films in the videos to come. And just to add a bit more flavour to this month's video, so it's not just all about Eric Rohmer, I'll talk about just one other film. So I was lucky enough to make it to the cinema once again during May to watch Jim Jarmusch's most recent film, Father, Mother, Sister, Brother, which stars Adam Driver, Mayim Bialik and Tom Waits, then Cate Blanchett, Vicky Krieps and Charlotte Rampling, and finally India Moore and Luke Sabat. This is his first film since 2019's The Dead Don't Die, and it's his first film since he's shot up my all-time favourite directors list, so getting to see one of his films on the big screen was really extra special for me. Now, this is a film of his that has received more mediocre reviews, and for me, though I wouldn't count it as among his best, I think there is plenty to enjoy here. This was a quiet and tempered three tales about family, and it's told in three separate standalone sections, each with their own sets of characters and locations, so a case could be made really for this being sort of three shorts edited together to make a feature-length film. At this point in my journey with Jarmusch and his films, I feel like I know exactly what to expect from him, so I was prepared for the style of pacing, the dialogue and the comedy. However, from the mixed response, clearly this wasn't for everyone, and again, in fairness, it's probably not where I'd suggest people's journey into his films begins. I do think that the film beautifully channels contemplative undertones and encourages you to think about your own family dynamics, whether they are similar or very different to the three stories we get to see. My personal favourite of the three, which also seems to be an unpopular opinion actually, was certainly the final sibling story, about a twin brother and sister connecting after the death of their parents. This story section in particular had much more warmth and enduring bittersweetness to it that really connected with me. That being said though, I do think there is plenty to take away from all three stories. In the first two of the stories, it was really interesting to see so much distance between family members, an awkwardness that you'd more expect to find between strangers, being front and centre between people who you might think should be those closest to each other. I thought this in particular was just done superbly and also acted to perfection. My goodness, is the cast for this top tier. And you see a lot of smiles in the silent moments and feel each person is sort of racking their brains trying to think of another topic of conversation. I think Jarmusch is also definitely making an interesting commentary on the differences in our relationships with our parents as opposed to our relationships with our siblings. One final thing that I really loved about this film, and I actually heard some people behind me talking about it afterwards as well, which was lovely to hear, was the set design. We have three separate stories, and the first two in particular have distinct main sets, and they are so rich and detailed and felt very lived in. It's such an impressive skill to be able to craft these spaces, making them unique and right for the characters, and it really grounds every scene in those spaces. There is actually a particular rocking chair that Tom Waits' character owns, and it was just amazing. I'll definitely be on the lookout for one for myself. This one is now streaming on Mubi if you want to check it out, and despite it not being top tier Jim Jarmusch, it's still really enjoyable, and I think still very much worth a watch. And lastly then, just a few honourable mentions for me. First, we have Two Mules for Sister Sarah, which I really quite enjoyed. It was great fun. And then Bob Trevino Likes It, which was a very sweet and sentimental film with a great central performance from Barbie Ferreira. And lastly, Hal Hartley's Simple Men, which, while it didn't quite live up to my expectations sadly, has certainly one of the best exchanges I think I've ever heard. And it goes, "I want adventure, I want romance." "Ned, there's no such thing as adventure, there's no such thing as romance, there's only trouble and desire." Trouble and desire? That's right, and the funny thing is, as soon as you desire something, you immediately get in trouble, and when you're in trouble, you don't desire anything at all. Fantastic stuff, and exactly the sort of witty dialogue that I love about Hal Hartley's films, and he is a really criminally underrated and underseen director, I think. And well, that brings us to the end of the video and the end of my May in film. If you're in the UK, I hope you've been managing well with this heatwave that we've been having. Hopefully you've got one fan or even a couple fans and some good earphones so you can have them on while you're watching some great stuff. Well, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.